Hello. I talk a lot in many of the podcasts with clients on my course at Autistic about delayed emotional reactions in a lot of neurodivergent people. And I'm one of those people that has delayed emotional reactions a lot. But I know when you are new to the idea of learning how your brain processes things, you read something like delayed emotional reactions and you're like, well, what does that mean? And so I wanted to share two recent kind of processing delays that I personally experienced in the hopes that maybe it will help some of you out who are trying to identify this stuff in yourselves. So the most recent one is that this morning I woke up at like 8 in the morning and I looked at my phone. Don't do that, but I did it. And somebody had texted me with a bit of bad news, and like no one died. It was like mild to moderate bad news, okay? But I knew I was disappointed, and I was like, but I didn't have any sort of physical reaction, and sort of in my brain, I was like, I bet I will feel disappointed when this hits. But I like got up and I did my stuff and I held my kids and I got on my treadmill and I did all the things. And then at like 10:30, I started crying. um, and like I'd been thinking about the text I'd gotten and I'd been like sort of working through it. Um, and so the emotion, the kind of physical reaction of the emotion wasn't unexpected, but it was like I looked at the clock. It was 2.5 hours from when I got the initial information, right? The initial thing went into my brain, and then it took 2.5 hours to turn there before a physical emotional reaction and the specific identification of oh I feel sad came, right? So I knew what I expected to feel, right? But I didn't actually have that feeling. That was just sort of the anticipation based on what I know of myself and what was likely to happen. But the actual emotion didn't happen until 2.5 hours after the specific uh, like cue for the emotion, right? Another thing that happened the other day, this happened with a client who will remain anonymous, but I did get their permission to share this. Um, I It was the evening. I had an appointment with this client from 6:30 to 7:30 my time. They are dealing with a very difficult decision. The conversation was very heavy, and the client was clearly expressing some big feelings and going through those big feelings. Um, and I had a lot of empathy for it, but I didn't have a lot of physical reaction to the feelings that I was seeing being experienced. But then, about really close to the end of the call, so maybe like 45 minutes of having this really intense conversation, I started getting a chattering jaw. um, which for me is an emotional indicator. My jaw, if it's not like actually physically cold, my jaw trembles, shakes when by itself, with no other like cues. Like I'm not crying, I'm not feeling jittery, I don't get racing heart. Nothing else happens. Just my jaw shakes when I feel nervous or um, I don't know how to describe the kind of big feeling I even like. So how long have I studied emotional intelligence and worked with folks on emotional intelligence? And I'm like, I don't actually know how to describe in words the feeling that I'm thinking about right now. But I guess my point is I'll have to think more about how I would identify that feeling even now. I mean, the feeling of camaraderie when somebody is going through something really difficult. I mean, it's sort of empathy. It's not really sympathy. It's also just like you feel like you want to fix it for them. That kind of almost, it's not quite an anger response in the sense of I'm angry about this injustice, but the anger response and why do people have to deal with this, right? That kind of like I wish it were, that injustice feeling, like I wish it were better for them. Trembling jaw, like really pretty significant. Big jaw shudder. So I wanted to share those two things because they're both what I would consider typical reactions for a lot of autistic people and some other neurodivergences. Maybe in my experience, mostly autistic folks, but if you have any kind of delayed emotional processing or any kind of slow processing in any other part of your life, um, a lot of times we get the input, the environmental input, and then the actual physical or label in our brain doesn't come till hours later, right? Almost an hour in an intense heavy situation for my jaw to start chattering, and almost 3 hours in a sad situation for me to start crying, right? This is sometimes why, personally, I think that some autistics are labeled as cold or unfeeling, because in the moment, at least for me, I can speak for myself, I might not have a big reaction, right? I internally know, oh, that's disappointing, but I don't have like a physical thing that neurotypical people can see when they look at me. But then 3 hours later, it's like, oh, here's the physical thing, here's the crying, right? But also, it comes up a lot in relationships, both like familial ones and romantic ones. Is like if you're having a heavy conversation with a partner and you're talking about something that pulls up a lot of emotions and feelings, especially if that partner is a different neurotype than you might look like you don't care, right? I'm making the air quotes, right? Your partner might think they don't care because they're not crying, they're not excited, they're not yelling, right? Whatever the emotional thing is. But then, several hours to several days later, you have a big physical reaction. And sometimes you're in a completely different, you could be at work, you could be at school, you could be helping your kids in the park, and suddenly you're angry, right? About the fight you had or whatever. So I hope that's helpful to somebody. If it is, like, leave me a comment or DM me, and I'd love to hear if those experiences are just me. And I'll just like very briefly pitch that if you would like to learn more about emotional intelligence and autistics, I do have a course over on Autistic. The link is in my bio. But that wasn't the point of this. The point was just to be like, here are 2 things that happened to me recently. So does this happen to you? Am I alone here? Let me know in the comments.